Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 232, and I am the show's host, Kyle. Returning to the show again is Will Porter. He is a freelance journalist. His work can be found at libertarianinstitute.org, consortiumnews.com, and antiwar.com. Will, welcome back to the show. How are you doing today?
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back. How are you?
I'm doing well. Kind of really depressing story I got you on to talk about today, and that is the war in Yemen in general, but specifically about this event that happened late last week. We had a bombing of a school bus in a northern city in Yemen, killing well over a dozen children, school children that were on that bus. So we're going to talk about that event, break that down, and then just kind of how this represents the, I think, larger Yemeni Civil War and the U.S. role in it and all that kind of stuff. So, Will, you ready to tackle this thing?
Yeah, unfortunately I am.
All right. So do you have any other real details to add? I know I don't think that solid numbers are yet determined, at least as of us recording this episode. I saw the number of children dead in the 20s. I saw 20, 21, and 29 as just different numbers offered up. Most of those children reported by the Red Cross being under 10. There's another 40 to 60 injured. And then the bus was also bombed when it was in a marketplace. And so then there were bystanders and possibly adults on the bus. I've seen the total death toll ranging up to 50, but this was mostly from Yemeni sources, with international sources putting that number either in the 30s or the 40s. Do you have anything more to add there, Will?
No, in terms of the specific death toll, I've seen a lot of sketchy stuff too. I've mostly seen like the word dozens used, dozens dead, but I don't think there's like a solid thing. I think people are actually still kind of digging through the rubble and stuff. At least last I saw, people were.
Right, and as far as it goes, as much video as I have looked at online of this event, and it's pretty disturbing, so I try not to watch too much, but certainly if any of the reporting and photographs retweeted by, international groups, Western journalists, Middle Eastern journalists, and then of course Nasser Arrabyee, who's a Yemeni journalist. I've seen like dozens of bodies of children, not dozens, probably around 20. I would say I would feel like would be the number of dead bodies of children I've seen in the alleged evidence. And so that does seem to be kind of, I would guess a number in the 20s for a number of children dead. And this is, I just want to go over this. So when you guys are reading stories out there on the issue, if somebody says that 50 children are dead or something, this is probably an untrue source. And, while it's important, I think it's important to get these little details right, because if you make any little mistakes like this, then that's all anybody talks about, and not the fact that, even 10 children, even 5 children were bombed while on a school bus.
Yeah, it's just a terrible story. And I mean, in the case of Yemen, we see kind of stories like this pretty often. Perhaps maybe not with such like a, seemingly high death toll with just children. But I mean, like this case is pretty representative of the war in general. Like on the list of Saudi targets so far, we can now add the school bus full of kids to, the wedding parties, the funeral processions, the farms, homes, factories, roads, bridges, hospitals, and schools. All of this stuff has been bombed pretty indiscriminately by the Saudis. And so this fits in really well with that list.
Right. And you'll occasionally get people on Facebook that will say, oh, this is an Iranian false flag or something like that. But both the Saudis and the U.S. State Department have more or less admitted that this was them that carried out the strike. They called the strike legitimate. The Saudis did. The U.S. said they're calling on Saudi Arabia to investigate it. So there seems to be little question that they were behind it. Now, maybe they're going to allege that there was like a missile that, the Houthis are smuggling a missile on this bus or something like that. And, who knows as to the truth of something like that yet to come. But, certainly what we do know is that Saudi Arabia dropped a bomb and that tens of children are dead from it. And this should disturb us all and definitely call into question the U.S. role in the Saudi bombing campaign, their war, and their role in the Yemen Civil War. So, Will, do you want to talk a little bit about what the U.S. role is here? I think a big question that especially, our libertarian and anti-war friends would, want to know is what's the U.S. responsibility here? Because that's a big subject to them.
Yeah, sure. So the United States, since the beginning of this conflict in March of 2015, has given the Saudi coalition, which is made up of like 9 countries or so, I think, given them pretty much all manner of aid. You know, we've given them mid-air refueling, logistics assistance, targeting assistance, vehicle maintenance. We've helped them before diplomatic bodies like the United Nations and sort of run interference for them. We've done just about everything possible to help them, except for flying the sorties ourselves.
Right. And, you know, the weapon sales is another big one, selling Saudi Arabia all the bombs and stuff that has allowed them to wage this war. Now, I've seen pictures coming out of Yemeni sources that say they found fragments of M82, that's a Mark 82. I think it's like a 500-pound bomb that they're saying was used in this attack. There are certainly, again, evidence that in bomb fragments from other sites like the funeral bombing in October of 2016, or a couple wedding bombings that happened, or U.S. cluster munitions, the casings found to be in Yemen. Some of this was reported and documented by Jane Ferguson on PBS NewsHour. She smuggled herself into northern Yemen and found this evidence. So, you know, there's pretty good indication that in the past, these U.S. bombs have been used by Saudi Arabia in the war crimes. And I see no reason to really, you know, think that it couldn't be a U.S. bomb used here. But again, you know, you've had so many U.S. made bombs dropped in Yemen. Who says that somebody didn't pick up these somewhere else and drop them here? But again, it's just the U.S. kind of subjecting themselves to this potential criticism because of all the help they have provided Saudi Arabia throughout the civil war.
Yeah, no doubt. The Mark munitions have been documented, I think even by Human Rights Watch and stuff, to have been used in Yemen a lot. And the same thing with cluster bombs. I think HRW also did some work on that. And a guy I spoke to in Yemen named Abdullah Allah has told me about, you know, people are dying every single day because of these cluster bombs. And there is like a treaty dealing with the use of cluster munitions, but the U.S. is not like a member of that treaty.
Right. I think the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are two of the few countries that are members of it. One, the issue with this cluster weapons, just get into that really quick, is that they don't it's not a big bomb. They explode, and then there's little bomblets that come out, and these are all like individual explosive ordinances. And a lot of times those little bomblets don't explode, and they could be up to like 4 pounds. Well, then, you know, the dust settles and nobody sees the bomblet, and a car drives over it, and that sets it off. They're often, you know, metal and shiny, so sometimes kids will pick them up. Years later, farmers, I think this is still the case in Cambodia or maybe Vietnam, where farmers plowing their fields where, you know, the bomblet has been buried by time, then hit a bomblet and it, you know, it'll destroy livestock, it'll kill them, it'll destroy farm equipment. All these various things happen years down the line. And so even if, you know, we end up with the official death toll at the end of this war, which is something that I guess we could get into next, Will, years to come, people will be suffering and dying from this war. But as far as you know now, and I know this is something that you've made an effort to track and you've wrote an article about it in the past, and we'll go ahead and link to that in the show notes page for anybody who wants to read Will's past reporting on the Yemeni death toll. But, you know, what are your sources telling you right now, Will?
Yeah, so just to run down this a little bit, just to get some, you know, basis of comparison, currently the United Nations, through the Office for the High Commissioner of Human Rights, they estimate a total right now of 15,000 casualties, civilian casualties, which breaks down to like 6,000 dead and 9,000 wounded. And this number is pretty much absurdly low given the daily onslaught of bombing and shelling. And, you know, I've talked to human rights workers who have said, basically confirmed this, that the UN is not able to properly count its casualties, and their figure does not actually reflect the reality on the ground. Now, a lot of that is because of the fact that, like, well over half of Yemen's health facilities have been either destroyed or put out of commission entirely, and the UN actually relies on those agencies for its data for the casualties and the killed and injured and the diseased. So that is the problem with the UN's ability to count casualties. So in some of my reporting, I've tried to kind of get alternative figures to get a better idea of how many people are actually dying. And so finally, I was able to get in touch with Yemeni NGO that collects its own statistics called the Middle East Foundation for Human Rights and Development. And I talked to their president named Abdullah Allah, And he told me that his organization estimates 65,000 civilian casualties, which breaks down to 15,000 dead and 50,000 wounded, excuse me. And so that's just the number that Allah, his group, can personally account for in their own sort of field work and their follow-ups and their statistics.
Is that dead by conflict or just dead since the war started? So does this include like deprivation deaths, or is this just the, people killed by a bomb, people killed by sniper fire, mortar mines, etc.?
Oh yeah, this is just civilian combat casualties. So not deprivation, not any of the other secondary causes, just like directly killed in the fighting.
Okay, because I just want to point that out, because I know like Save Our Children has estimated that one child dies every 10 minutes in Yemen right now. So there's a lot of death going on too from other kind of sources. But at the same time, it's the Saudi blockade that's one of the main factors that's causing all these deprivation deaths in Yemen, on top of their bombing war against the people of Yemen. And of course that too is backed by the United States. We're really helping to enforce that blockade.
Right. Yeah, it really depends on how you kind of partition this data. Like right now I'm talking primarily about just people who've died in combat. But then you can include, you can break it down between combatants and civilians or all together, or you can break it down to people who've died from secondary causes, etc. But this 65,000 is civilians who've died just in the fighting itself. However, soon after I got in touch with this man, Abdullah Allah, the Washington Post actually ran a piece that cited an agency called ACLED, which estimates 50,000 killed total, which includes combatants and civilians. And that's also just in combat. However, that 50,000 number is much larger than anything the UN's put out, and it's much larger than what my source, Abdul Allah, put out. And actually, that 50,000 killed number is much closer to what a mutual friend of ours, or somebody that we both look up to and read his work, Nasser Arrabyee, who has been saying for quite some time that the death toll is probably between 50 and 70,000. That's sort of been like an unconfirmed estimate. He's just a journalist. He doesn't do like real deep statistical work as far as I know. I think he just kind of collects like a broad, rough estimate. But what ACLED put out, this 50,000 number, is pretty close to what Nasser's been saying for a while.
Wow. Well, thanks for giving us that information. Well, I do think it's important to understanding, like how just brutal this war has been. Another factor that I just want to point out that I learned from Iona Craig on the Scott Horton show that I thought was very interesting, and I'll link to all this in the show notes page. That way, anybody who wants to listen to these Scott Horton interviews can. She pointed out that 80% of the Yemeni population lives in rural areas. And so, that really adds to why it's hard to count the deaths, because they're not happening in cities. They're happening out really in the middle of nowhere. And it also makes it hard to get food all the way out to these people. And so while somebody pointed out on Twitter that, well, I went to Sana'a, there was a lot of food in the city and people were eating at cafes, that doesn't account for the fact that most people are way out in the middle of nowhere in Yemen. Again, the country has a relatively large population with, I think, like 26 million? At least that's roughly the population pre-war.
Yeah, that's about right.
So in the media coverage of this, because there was some U.S. mainstream media coverage of this event, not a lot, I saw like one little segment on CNN or something like that. Some details that are left out, Will, are that, the U.S. bats the Saudi coalition, and the death count they give for the war is typically 10,000. So as yourself being a journalist, what do you think of why I guess we get this reporting from the mainstream media sources?
Well, yeah, it's because they're relying on the official agencies, like the United Nations. And I believe that 10,000 figure includes combatants and civilians. So the figure I gave you earlier said 6,000 dead, and that's just civilians. And I think if you can include the combatants as well, I think that's where the 10,000 figure is coming from. But yeah, they're relying on these official bodies who are not able to properly update their figures or to collect casualty data. And so they're just repeating over and over again these outright wrong numbers, really, is I think we could call them at this point.
Right, but don't you think there's something wrong with the media organization reporting the same the casualty number since 2016 in a war? Shouldn't they have some responsibility to at least note that there's no accurate numbers? And shouldn't that maybe mean somebody is out there trying to pursue more accurate numbers if they keep because they keep reporting this number like it's the current tally?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because like these big news agencies, they're just going to rely on the official estimates and stuff, and that's what they're going to report. But however, like you're right, they should be doing the math. Like as one of my former journalism professors used to say, they're not doing the math. They're not really thinking about this. That they keep reporting the same figure, yet there's daily bombings and daily shellings and daily death. And so they should be, you would think they should acknowledge that, but they haven't.
So something that caught the eye of people on social media, I think, was the State Department, who is the former Fox News, pretty face in the morning, Heather, and I forget her last name even.
Is it Newhart? Heather Newhart?
Yeah, that's right. And, she's giving a press conference and she's talking about, she's answering questions about this incident in pretty immediate aftermath. I think it was the next morning, but her tone and her demeanor, Will, I don't know, what was your reaction to this? And again, I'll link to this in the show notes page for people who want to watch the clip. There's like a 4-minute clip, so it's definitely, you're able to watch, but she just kind of smiles the whole way through.
Yeah, I mean, like, I rarely get, like, palpably angry about these things anymore just because I'm so desensitized, but the video like that really does kind of make me angry, boil my blood. You can just see the absolute contempt on her face. Like, yeah, she's trying to smile through it, but, like, you can see this lady despises these reporters, asking her very basic questions, like, inquiring about the American role in, picking targets. So, like, if the United States is helping Saudi choose targets, why are they bombing school buses? Why are they bombing funeral processions? Either they're not doing that right, or that is the target they're selecting, and there's something really wrong going on there. And so these reporters are trying to ask the spokeswoman, these types of questions, and she's really just shutting them down.
And one reason that's really disappointing and really important is that the way international law works, the fact that they're, American planes are refueling the Saudi bombers or the Saudi jets that are dropping the bombs. And oh yeah, those Saudi bombers were made in the United States and the bombs were made in the United States too. That may not open the United States up to like being complicit under international law. But if we're helping to pit targets for whatever reason, that's something that opens the United States up to like possible, criminal activity of some kind. I'm not sure what like international law code could actually do to the United States of all countries. However, that would be, one of the places people could look to, for legal reasons. So it's really even worse that she's dismissing that, in that way.
Right. Yeah, in terms of international law, like, not that it's actually going to be used against the U.S. in practice, but I think just like the word of the law, I think it's also American law says this too, that you're not allowed to give weapons or sell weapons to like human rights abusers. But like what establishes somebody as a human rights abuser is like there has to be an inquiry and an official investigation and all that kind of stuff for it to be established. Yet every single time something like this happens where the Saudis blow up a funeral procession or a wedding party, there's never any real pressure from the United States for any kind of real international investigation. The U.S. just says the Saudis can investigate themselves. And indeed, in this press conference, the reporters are asking the spokeswoman, is the U.S. going to push for a real international investigation by the UN or something? And she basically says no, like we're just going to let the Saudis investigate their own war crimes and leaves it at that.
Right. And isn't that insane that that's like not a big issue? I don't know. This is what always amazes me is like you could get off like investigating yourself. Would they have ever let Assad investigate the chemical weapons attack in Douma? And say, hey guys, it's all cool. There definitely wasn't a chemical weapons attack there. And would have anybody in the U.S. media have bought that or been okay with that?
Right, of course not. Like the double standards are just like immediately apparent.
Right. And I just want to know, in the Saudi statement, they pretty much blamed Iran and the Houthis for this. And that gets me into kind of what I want to do on the second part of today's show, Will. And that's to break down some common myths of the Yemen Civil War and just how I think that the general media reports it kind of like as fact kind of stuff, like Iran bats the Houthis and why we're in this war in the first place. And that's a question that I guess I want to start with. And the first myth really isn't a myth, but nobody talks about why the war started. They kind of like make this like vague claim that we're fighting the war because Iran is backing the Houthis and the Houthis are attacking Saudi Arabia. However, that really wasn't the reason for starting the war. So, Will, do you want to get in and remind our audience why this war started in the first place?
Yeah, sure. It depends on how far back you want to take it, but I think we can kind of start somewhere in the middle. We don't have to go all the way back to the beginning of the story. So basically, the United States, for a while throughout the 2000s, backed the president of Yemen, the long-term president of Yemen, named Ali Abdullah Saleh. And we gave him weapons and money to basically fight our enemies in Yemen, the Al-Qaeda guys, the Sunni-type militants. However, what Saleh did with some of that money and some of those weapons was fought his other enemies in the north, the Houthis. And in doing this, he's fought like 6 different wars with the Houthis, with this group. The Houthis have a political party called Ansar Allah, and they're based up in the north in the Sada governorate of Yemen. And so there's all this conflict and tension between Saleh and the Houthis. And basically the Houthis are empowered by this, and they're emboldened every single time they get in a war with Saleh. And so he's helping them, become more and more bold and stronger each time he fights them. So eventually, Saleh is basically pushed out of power by this international deal, this international transition deal. And a guy named Mansur Hadi is put into power on a one-man ballot. And in 2014, like for a long time, the Houthis after that, for months after that, the Houthis protested and didn't like it. And this is around the time of like the Arab Spring and stuff, and they're complaining. And so by 2014, the Houthis eventually do march on the capital city of Sana'a and basically force the resignation of Mansur Hadi.
Right, and I believe, but there was like an agreement made during the like election process where Hadi was supposed to like give up power or have another election by like 2014. And once he overstayed his welcome per that agreement, it was a little bit after that the Houthis had finally had enough. And so it's not like, the Houthis are just like some savages who saw an opportunity to take power and did. They marched on Sana'a after Hadi refused to give up his throne, which he had agreed to.
Right. This is not just like a crazy, offensive to overthrow the government. There was some legitimate, grievance. Like I said, this had been preceded by all these protests and stuff. So it was sort of the culmination of a lot of political tension and turmoil. Now, one thing that should absolutely be noted is that, at least according to American officials who sort of said this against interest, they wouldn't have an incentive to say this. American officials say that Tehran, the Iranian government, warned the Houthis to not march on Sana'a, basically telling them, we are not going to help you if you get yourself involved in this, you'll be getting yourself in over your head and, don't do it. And so this really cuts against the idea that, the Houthis taking Sana'a was done, at the behest of Iran, and, that's why this all started.
Right. And then, I guess after that, Will, do you want to just get into why did America and the Saudi coalition actually start bombing the Houthis?
Oh, sure. So yeah, the Saudi coalition basically intervened here on behalf of the government of Hadi, or the ousted government of Hadi, government in exile, and basically said, we're going to put Hadi back on the throne and kick the Houthis out of power, kick them out of Sana'a. And the United States, being a Saudi ally, and according to the New York Times, at least, the New York Times claims that the U.S. was trying to placate the Saudis over the Iran nuclear deal, which was, I believe, a great thing, actually, if you care about, a nuclear-armed Iran. But yeah, so this is basically this is the story. The Saudis got involved to reinstall Hadi on the throne, and the Americans, followed Saudi's lead because they wanted to basically appease them over the Iran deal.
Right. And then there's some idea that at the same time you have Mohammed bin Salman, who's now the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, had just gotten promoted to being the defense minister of the country, and named his operation in Yemen Decisive Storm. So there's certainly, you could speculate that, he possibly wanted to either appear macho or to look to have a very successful offensive against a group he could say is linked to Iran, and, probably win some popular support was his idea there. And, it's not impossible that it was just in part an ego move by Mohammed bin Salman.
Sure. I mean, yeah, we've seen things like that before from statesmen. And yes, this is a young, sort of brash guy coming up. He's the crown prince, and he wants to prove himself, I think. I don't think that's there may be more to this. There might be more intricate stuff behind the scenes going on, but I don't think that's an implausible sort of general thrust,
Right. And so one of the reasons that this war is apparently dragging on is because the Houthis are, I guess, Yemeni Hezbollah, Will, is pretty much what the claim is, that the Houthis are nothing more than a proxy of Iran, looking to wage an offensive against the U.S. ally. Not Israel this time, at least not yet. Maybe, Saudi Arabia is in the way, so they're going there first.
Right, yeah, we joke about this a lot. The media always says the Iran-backed Houthis. It should have a trademark symbol or something.
Right, they'll even say the expansion of the Persian Empire into Yemen. I've heard this statement before.
Right, I would just ask, what empire are you talking about? The Safavids or something? This is outrageous. But yeah, there's really not a lot to back the idea that the Houthis are just the Yemen's version of Hezbollah. As I already pointed out, Iran told the Houthis to not take Sana'a in 2014, and they did it anyway. And so if they're owned outright by Iran, if they're controlled by Iran, then they're obviously not, I don't know, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't comport. And so another claim that's often made about the Houthis in Iran is claims of weapons shipments and stuff, which does not really hold up, I don't think. You know, there's been one particular allegation about one ship called the Jihan 1, but a great journalist named Gareth Porter has sort of debunked that claim entirely. And in general, too, like Yemen is one of the most highly armed societies on planet Earth in terms of like small arms and rockets and stuff. And so Iran would not need to, you know, back them like that. And so there's really not a lot of evidence backing this idea that the Houthis are Hezbollah at all. Like really, like if there's any ties to Iran, it's sort of like more general and broad and not like operational or, you know, in terms of military assistance.
Right. And the other big claim is the missiles. And a lot of people say that Iran is shipping Yemen missiles. Of course, this is a country that can't get enough food for its people, and fuel is lacking. However, they're claiming that I guess Iran is smuggling missiles into Yemen. The true story of Yemen's missiles is this, is that they are converted Scud missiles. Yemen was once North and South Yemen. South Yemen was within the Soviet orbit and bought Scud missiles from North Korea and from the USSR. They, I guess, held on to those missiles, you know, for a long time because what were they going to use them on? And when Salah went and joined up with the Houthis, he had given them, I guess that's how they got access to the ballistic missiles. They killed Salah. Most of his forces was absorbed within, you know, the Houthis. And so they've been converting those missiles. I've also seen that like they're firing rockets and have like now weapons that they claim are Yemeni made. Of course, I mean, Yemen's a rather large country. They have a lot of weapons and military supplies. So it's not surprising, I guess, that they're actually developing their own missiles now. Certainly this is something that Nasser Arrabyee said on his last episode that he was on the Scott Horton show. He pointed out that that's not to say that the Houthis maybe aren't receiving emails from different groups giving them information on how to build these weapons. Certainly, you know, there's no shortage now of, you know, proliferation of the information of how to build different weapons around the world. And, you know, with digital communication the way it is, how are you ever going to prevent that from getting into the country? This is actually something I talked about when they said, obviously the Houthis are allied with Iran because the Houthis are building similar mines as Hezbollah does. And it's like, just because the Houthis got, you know, the same blueprint for mines doesn't mean that, you know, this is a different group. I mean, the Houthis control a large portion of Yemen and do seem to have a lot of popular support. So it's not surprising that there's not several talented engineers that are able to, you know, be recruited by the Houthis into building missiles. And, you know, so past missiles have been identified as being the converted Scud missiles. And it's not surprising that they're, you know, developing their own missiles and have different technologies, you know, to launch these missiles. I think it's interesting, I guess, just to note that I haven't seen like any reports of, you know, 100 people dying in Saudi Arabia are very much being destroyed. I mean, occasionally you'll have reports that like the Riyadh airport was targeted or some base in west Saudi Arabia was targeted. But oftentimes, if there's any reports of casualties at all, it's reports that the debris from the missile being intercepted or the missile interceptor itself is actually what ends up killing people. And so, you know, if they are firing all these missiles, they don't seem to be particularly effective. At least that, you know what I mean? There's a big question mark there. That, again, you would think if you have really honest media, like somebody would be out there asking like, why, you know, what's going on with that? And, you know, we keep saying that the Houthis are firing these missiles into Saudi Arabia. And that's a myth I want to move into next, Will, is, you know, is Saudi Arabia just defending itself here? And if they are, the missiles that they're defending themselves from, again, don't seem to be super effective.
Yeah, I don't really think you can make the claim that Saudi is just defending itself. As I said, they got involved in this conflict in the first place entirely on their own volition. This is totally like a political thing. They wanted to reinstall a government back in power. It wasn't like they responded to an invasion or attack on their borders or something. Now, any of this missile attack stuff, this only really began in earnest like years after the conflict started. You know, you heard like a couple stories about like some small Houthi boat shooting a rocket at a ship or something earlier on in the conflict. But really, it's escalated as the conflict has gone on. And the entire time, as we've said, the Saudis have been, waging this indiscriminate bombing campaign. Really since the beginning, since 2015, this has been the case.
Yeah, and that's just the important thing, is the contents and understanding the order of events here, that the Saudis started bombing the Houthis long before the Houthis started firing missiles back at the Saudis. So how could it possibly be that the Saudis get to claim they're just defending themselves and the Houthis are the ones that are somehow, just have to quit, attacking back when they were attacked first? The last kind of myth I want to get into, Will, is that what the United States is doing in Yemen is taking on Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the most dangerous terrorist organization in the world. And that's why we have to do this, is because AQAP is there and they're dangerous.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can even make this argument without it's from a place of confusion. They have to be making it from a place of confusion, excuse me. Because currently, like the status of the forces on the ground right now, the Houthis are one of the greatest enemies of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So by fighting one of Al-Qaeda's greatest enemies, we can do nothing but help them there. Now, the United States has in the past flown, and I think we might still do to some small degree, flying drone operations against AQAP there. But that's entirely separate from our support for the Saudi war against the Houthis, which is doing more, really, I think, to bolster AQAP. Earlier on in the war, I'm not sure what the status of the city is now, but an entire city in the south called Al-Mukalla was controlled by Al-Qaeda. And so really, I think we've seen this war bolster these types of groups.
Right. Well, I think that city is now back in the hands of, I think, mostly UAE forces. I don't think they're necessarily Saudi-backed forces down there, but it's the Saudi coalition forces. And I believe that city in particular was mentioned in the AP news story detailing how the Saudis and the UAE have actually kind of paid off or allowed AQAP to keep their weapons and money and withdraw from different cities, and including having dinner with the AQAP commanders before they leave the cities. And so this isn't just alternative media reported, this is from the Associated Press even now admits that the Saudi-backed coalition has really, at the very least, been very generous to the way they treated AQAP throughout this war, and that many of their fighters have been absorbed into the Hadi ranks.
Sure. And as I said, by killing the natural enemies of these groups, I think you also expand their power and influence.
Right. And, what have we learned is that, the chaotic war zone type groups are probably more likely to produce international jihadist, terrorist, crazy, violent people, and also allows them to thrive, provides the environment that they need to thrive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this kind of in some areas of Yemen, I imagine it's probably pretty lawless. And, you end up with situations maybe not exactly the same, but akin to the Anbar province in Iraq, where these things become hotbeds of radicalism and extremism. And before you know it, you got a group like ISIS. I think we've even speculated a little bit that the next Al-Qaeda or the next big crazy Islamist group might be coming from Yemen, precisely because of just all the carnage and the death and destruction there.
Right. Well, think of all the parents, brothers, sister, aunts, uncles, friends, relatives, and, just people who lived in the community of these 20-something children that, were blown up. I'm not sure what they're going to do for the burial and kind of thing, but, some of these kids were separated from their limbs and stuff like that. Think about that there's people in Yemen right now who are trying to sort through the limbs and figure out how many kids were there and, what body part belongs where so you could get the most appropriate burial. And that's something that community is now subjected to. And, all right, well, so we discussed the kind of utter carnage that's going on in Yemen, and I think addressed a lot of the most important points along the war. Is there anything that you'd like to add about the war, or if not, just kind of plug your stuff and tell people where they can find your work?
Yeah, just in summary, I think when we're thinking about Yemen, it's one of the least reported and covered conflicts in planet Earth, right now. I think there was that MSNBC thing where it was shown that MSNBC had not covered it once in the whole year, and they covered Stormy Daniels hundreds of times. So yeah, we really do need to talk about this Yemen thing, and really front and center in this narrative, we need to put the United States' role. Because really this could not happen without American assistance to the Saudi coalition. So that's basically what I would leave you with. Now, in terms of my stuff, you can find me on Twitter at WKP ANCAP. You can find my writing at antiwar.com in the viewpoint section, at the Libertarian Institute in the blog and the featured articles section, and at consortiumnews.com. And if you really like what I do, you can find me at patreon.com/WKPjournalist.
And me and Will do put out bonus episodes and stuff to our Patreon supporters where we talk either about stuff other than foreign policy or just, I don't know, maybe a little different kind of subject. So you can find my Patreon at /foreignpolicyfocus if you want to donate to this show. The show itself could be found at libertarianinstitute.org. So, that's a great place to go for mine and Will's work in general. You could hop on there and find my podcast on the homepage. You can find the news roundup I do on the homepage, and then Will at the blog are in the featured articles and other places. Libertarian Institute on Libertarian Union on Facebook, and KYAAALE on Twitter. Thanks, everyone.